Welcome to Bosses with Baggage. I'm Sherry Sutton, your host and business growth guide. Around here, we believe that failures are our superpowers. So in this podcast, we'll explore the many ways that setbacks can mold, shape, and change your life and your business and ensure that you come out of the fire better than before. Through interviews with business leaders and discussions of my own personal struggles, we'll unlock the secrets to turning setbacks and low moments into opportunities to thrive. From approaching your business with a servant's heart to getting comfortable with being the face of your brand, each episode will be a safe, judgment-free zone to reframe the concept of failure with honesty, empathy, grace, and a whole lot of laughter. So are you ready? Let's go. Hello, my friends. So excited today to be here with the amazing Amy. And I'm not even going to try to say your last name, so you do it for me.
Shoenthal.
Shoenthal. Thank you. I'm the worst at pronunciation with these things. So I'm here with the amazing Amy Shoenthal. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our chat.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We were talking a little bit before. I'm like, wait, let's not talk now. Let's save it all for the podcast. So I'm so excited to hear more about you. But first, give us a little introduction to you, to who you are, to what you do. And then it's Bosses with Baggage. So we'll get right into the baggage after that.
Sounds good. I'm happy to talk all things baggage. So I am a journalist, author, writer. I'm a multi-hyphenate. I wear many hats, although none as chic as the one you're wearing, Sherry. But yeah, I started my career as a marketer, and I have always done some freelance writing on the side. And at some point in the past few years, those roles sort of shifted and the writing came front and center, although I still do plenty of marketing consulting. So yeah, and I'm publishing my first book this March. It's called The Setback Cycle. And it's based on a lot of the founders and leaders and innovators that I've interviewed for my Forbes Women column over the years, and how along their journeys, one of the most formative experiences they have and what ultimately leads them to success is how they persevere through setbacks.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I can't wait to hear a little bit more. Maybe give us a little preview of the book. And, use this time however you think it would be best for our listeners, because I know I want to hear a little bit more about you. So I have to imagine you don't get interested in learning about people's setbacks unless you've had some of your own. So would love to hear a little bit about your journey, kind of those moments in your life that were like, okay, this can't be the same anymore. And as part of that, what inspired you to write this book? Because I love it. I cannot wait to read it. And what inspired you through that to write this book?
Of course. Well, I was initially inspired by the people who I talked to, and I started seeing, when you do enough interviews or you do the same kind of work for a long enough time, you start to see trends and themes and, commonalities between all the stories. And I was seeing these themes within all the people that I spoke to that they really lit up when they started talking about what they did following a setback and how that led them to a totally unexpected path, but somewhere that, was even better than where they were initially headed. And I just kept wondering why this kept happening. I said, are they all just sharing some sort of playbook? Why does the same formula keep repeating itself for all these?
Is there some business book that I missed where we're supposed to talk about our setbacks?
So the answer is, there wasn't, but I wrote it. So I wrote the playbook because I kept seeing these themes, and it went beyond just learning from your mistakes, or even, I'm sure you talk about on this podcast, the concept of post-traumatic growth and how you can build innovation after trauma. And, setbacks aren't necessarily traumas. Setbacks aren't just obstacles, and setbacks aren't necessarily they don't necessarily happen because of a mistake that you made. So it's all of these things, but none of these things at the same time. And so as I started to go down this rabbit hole of understanding why people found so much success after setbacks, and this is mostly women in business and politics and social good, I started talking to psychologists and neuroscientists and executive coaches. And like I said, I ended up writing the playbook because there was so much information, but it wasn't framed in the way of looking at it through the lens of a setback and what that really means. So I could continue on, but that's really how I came to write this book.
Oh, that's fascinating. And have you, because I'd love for you to walk through a little bit of the model that you put in. And I know you've shared a little bit in another networking group that we're in together. But if you look back at your setbacks in your life, have you seen the same that you like, can you see how you went through that same thing at some point in your life? And you're like, oh, that's what I did.
Absolutely. And everyone who I talk to, once they start understanding the idea of a setback and what it is and how the cycle works, you can see it in so many instances in your life. And frankly, this book, right? The act of writing this book, I didn't realize it at the time because, like I said, I came to it. I was motivated to do it because of what I was seeing with other people. But the act of writing this book really ended up unearthing a setback that I was going through the entire time without really realizing it. And so part of the book at the very beginning, I talk about how it's possible to sleepwalk into a setback willingly. Because that's what I did without realizing it. It's so much
Walk us
easier to
through that.
recognize. Yeah, it's so much easier to recognize these things with the advantage of hindsight. And so my setback, which again was no real like mistake or wrongdoing of anyone, myself included, my setback really began when I dared to become a mother while working in the corporate world. And I worked at a wonderful place that was very inclusive, had very good maternity leave policies that have gotten even better since I had my child. And I was surrounded by other working mothers who had gone through it and were there for support. And yet, walking back into that world and navigating that identity shift as a working mom was still one of the most difficult and confusing and identity shaking experiences of my life. And I didn't realize it at the time. I just thought, oh, this is what everyone does. It is normal for me to be very self-conscious as I walk into the pumping room holding my little suitcase. That is a visible reminder it's a visible signal to my colleagues that I am not as dedicated to my job as I used to be, even though I knew I was giving everything to my job. I was pouring everything into it. And yet I had this just incredible self-consciousness of what is the signal I am giving? And nobody, said anything to me or really did anything wrong. It was just the message that society had imprinted upon me of, well, when you return to work as a mother, here's what everyone's going to think. Frankly, I had been guilty of thinking that about other working parents that I saw, before I became one myself, because these messages are just so prevalent. And again, at even the most inclusive of workplaces, it's not just about like policy and, your maternity leave or paternity leave or parental leave policies. It's about the mindset that you adopt when you re-enter that world as a changed person. Fundamentally, it's despite all the literature, despite everything, it is a really difficult shift to navigate. And so that's what led me to sort of questioning everything around me. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Where am I spending my time away from my kid? How am I spending that time? And so for me, as with, any other writers you might know, the answer always reveals itself on the page. So I turned to writing to process these things. I turned to my community. I started talking to people. I started listening to other people's stories and the difficulties that they endured, whether, parent related or not. And I think that, hearing what people had gone through and how they persevered was just so inspiring to me. And, what I could offer them was to write their stories and publish their stories. And I just kept doing it. I had always been a freelance writer my entire career, but after the birth of my daughter, that freelance writing career just like skyrocketed. Eventually that sort of took front and center over my marketing career, which I still do marketing consulting for, plenty of people. I have a very robust consulting business, but, people mostly know me through my writing. So it was a very interesting shift and a very interesting setback that, again, I kind of sleepwalked right into.
Yeah, and it's like by circumstance, as so many of our setbacks are, right? Like, oh, all of a
Exactly.
sudden I have moved, and next thing I
Mhm.
know, I'm having this whole awakening,
You
right?
have to rebuild
You
its, identity. It's environmental, it's cultural, it's societal. Like for me, I feel like it was everything. It was personal, business, career, just everything. And no one has to endure a trauma or make some sort of mistake or be wronged by anyone in order to go through a setback. There's a huge spectrum of setbacks. And so mine was, on the less obvious side, but it still was. And it took me a very long time to realize that in hindsight, that was a setback.
Yeah. So how did you go from, oh my gosh, this isn't working for me, to now are I assume you've left that role and you're now coming out with a book. Like what did that transition look like?
It was not linear. It was not a linear transition. And I think, again, one of the way I process things is by writing. And I had all this energy and all this confusion, and I put all that energy into writing, into my hobby instead of my day job. And all of a sudden, again, like the roles shifted and I started getting a lot of attention for my writing. And all of a sudden I was being approached by politicians and celebrities and, really people I really admired wanting me to write their stories. And that was a really interesting thing. And, I would love to say that I don't need external validation and it all comes from within. But, when you're not getting the validation you need in one part of your life, you seek it elsewhere. And that's what I did. And all of a sudden, I was sort of like thriving in this place that I didn't expect to thrive. That was always just like a little hobby that hummed in the background. And so that background took front and center, and I leaned all into it and I loved it. And yeah, and I existed in that sort of gray space for years of, okay, well, this is coming front and center, but I still have this pretty, great job, despite having worked through my identity crisis. And eventually, once I recognized it, I told the people around me, I told my colleagues, like, hey, like, this wasn't great. We should talk about this to make sure other people don't have to experience this. No one really did anything wrong, but we should really talk about like why this happened and how to prevent it. And everyone was very receptive to that. And, no one wants a working mom to come back and feel anything. Well, I mean, no one I know wants to make a working mom feel less than. But I think people don't necessarily have the tools, especially if you're not a working mom yourself. And even if you are, you don't necessarily have the tools to understand what it's going to take to make that person feel validated and secure and confident upon their return, because it's a very difficult time. You almost feel like, if you're lucky enough to have childcare, you almost feel like, okay, well, I'm not needed at home now because I set all this up, but I don't feel as needed coming back to work because I had these replacements. People replaced me while I was on leave, and now do they even want me back? And where do I fit in? And it's like any transition, it's complicated, and that one's it's ripe with self-consciousness for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally identify with that. And I don't think I ever really fully got back in with 2 feet. I was only a year and a half or so into becoming a mother, and was back in the corporate world and doing all the things. But it's kind of similar to you. I had this side hobby of photography, and it all of a sudden started blossoming in and of itself. And I think in some ways it was the universe saying, like, you have other options, right? You have
Yeah.
other paths that you can take that are
Yeah.
going to be more fulfilling for you, that are you're not going to feel as self-conscious, right? Where you're going to be able to
True.
embody who you are as a full person without that level of self-consciousness. And so I ended up, it was about a year and a half later, I was fortunate enough, I took a package and ended up leaving and became a full-time photographer for a number of years, because it was the best thing that I could do,
Amazing.
when I with a small child. And I like what kind of the similarities in our story is that it's not linear, right? I've done that, and then I went back to the corporate world, and then
Yeah.
I've gone and been an entrepreneur again, and it changes over time. But as long as you're always awakening towards trying to be more and more authentic.
Yeah. And I have, once I started talking about my experience, so many people related to it. And so many people benefited from hearing that I felt like this, despite, again, having all the tools and resources available to me that existed, which, again, like so many people don't have. But if someone in that position could feel the way I felt, what else is going on? How do other people feel? How do people without the resources or without the childcare or with some sort of, horrible demanding job that is, not being inclusive or welcoming to a new working parent feel? And so, there's a spectrum of setbacks, and I wanted to uncover, well, if all these people that I'm interviewing are just lighting up when they're talking about their journey and they're talking about how they persevered through a setback and how it got them to this unexpected and incredible place, well, where's the playbook? Where is the playbook? What are they using? How are they getting through it? So I wrote the playbook.
I love it. So tell us what the lessons were that you learned by interviewing these people. What's the process like? I mean, obviously we're going to read the book, but give us the little Cliff Notes version, and just, I'm so fascinated to hear what they told you.
Of course. So what I did was I took the stories and I started to outline a framework. And then I did a lot of research, but I also interviewed, neurologists, executive coaches, psychologists, organizational psychologists, people who, had really kind of like dabbled in this area, but hadn't focused solely on setbacks and how they work. And what I did was I validated the framework through them, and I adjusted the framework through the expert interviews I conducted. And so the cycle itself is a 4-phased cycle. It starts with establish, because like I said, it's very easy to sleepwalk into a setback. So step 1 is acknowledging where you are. And so many people, when I talk through the establish phase, or even, those few people who have read the book to date, once they read through establish, all of a sudden like light bulbs go off and people realize that they have endured more setbacks than they realize. And all of a sudden it's very clear that they had to go through the cycle to learn the thing and do the thing. And it goes beyond, again, just like learning from your mistakes or, going through post-traumatic growth. It's a true understanding that a setback is a reversal in progress. Right? It's when the path forward is no longer clear. It's when you're working towards something and then you are unexpectedly sent in reverse. And so that could be a relationship, a job. If you're an entrepreneur, like a divorce of co-founders, things like that, where all of a sudden, this thing you were working towards, this path you were on is now gone and you have to recreate a whole new path. And the thing that to answer your question, the thing that gets most founders through that moment is remembering their North Star, their mission, and why they created the thing they created. If anyone's familiar with Angela Duckworth and her grit theory, perseverance and motivation is the biggest indicator of success. How motivated are you to go and rebuild or to pivot or to adjust? Or is it time to just totally break the thing down and go somewhere else? And so the book and the 4-phase cycle kind of helps people make those decisions based on where they are and what their overall goal is. Why do you get up in the morning and do what you have to do? Why do you do payroll? Why do you do invoices? Because you're working towards this larger mission. And what is that mission? So helping crystallize that is one of the biggest things that gets people through the setback cycle. There's a million other things, but that's one that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, and that resonates so much with me. One of the things that I do whenever I'm working with a new client is really spend time on what I call rooting. So there's like 3 phases of the process, right? Root, serve, and attract, right? So when the rooting part is what's my mission, what's my vision, what's my values, and what's my superpower? What do I bring? What was I uniquely created for in this world? And what's that thing that I'm willing to stand up and say, this is what I do really well. This is who I am. This
Mhm.
is how I'm going to enter the world. This is, and really spending some time rooting in on that, because the people who you serve, which is the next step, and the products you're going to serve them with, and the way you're going to attract people, those things are always going to change. But the fundamental base is always, what is my superpower? What was I
Mhm.
given to do during this lifetime by whoever, whatever you believe in? How am I going to root into that and really have that be my life's mission? And then everything else gets built on top of that. Because when you have these setbacks, you have to come back to that, right?
Yeah.
How can I use this as a way to go back to my mission, to serve people in a new way? Because those setbacks are always ways of us learning new things that allow us to serve other people, either new people or the same people, but better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And by the way, I do have a superpower exercise in the explore phase of the book, which is phase 3, when you've sort of understood that you're in a setback, embraced it, dealt with the difficult feelings, and then you're exploring your options. A great exercise to do during that phase is understand what your superpower is. But superpowers sound fun and light and easy, but it actually takes quite a bit of thought and soul searching to understand your true superpower, because it's not just like, oh, hey, I'm good at writing. That's not my superpower. That's like a talent. You know what I mean? That's like something that, yeah, I work hard at getting better at it, but that's not my superpower. You know, my superpower is like energy and infusing a good story into a world and kind of like making sense of things and places and people and culture through storytelling. You know, it's like you really have to kind of dig deep to get to the root of your superpower, as you said.
Yeah, and I think for you too, it sounds like getting and maybe this is just a journalist's thing, but getting all these different inputs and finding the common theme through them and then weaving them into a story, or in your case, like an actual process that we're going to go, that we're going to go through, and find a way to articulate that. That's a superpower in and of itself, just being able to see through all these different inputs and see a common thread.
Yeah, I always say I approach storytelling as sense making. Storytelling is how I make sense of the world. And that's why I've always done writing, and that's why I think those skills obviously translate to marketing, but it's all in the book. Like, it's why the book exists, because of this need for sense making. Once I saw the theme, it was, I needed to make sense of it. I needed to understand it. And then once I understood it, I needed to share it with other people so that they could understand it. And I really think that the framework itself will really help, kind of change people's lives. Because once you see something through a different lens, it can be a slight adjustment, or it can be just totally earth shattering.
Yeah. So tell us the 4 parts of the model or the
Sure. So the
framework.
cycle, yes, the cycle starts with establish, which is identifying what a setback is and knowing if you're in one or if you're sleepwalking into one. Then you go into embrace, which is acknowledging that you're in it, feeling all the feelings. We go into a little some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy exercises, so that you can, again, like, work through the gunk so that you can get to the other side. And then we get to the really fun stuff, which is explore. So that's when you start, okay, I went through this. Here's the data that I have. Here's the information I have. Now I need to assess my options. And that's through the explore phase. And then you go through emerge, which is coming out of your setback. But you pause at the beginning of emerge, because just knowing what you're supposed to do or knowing what you're capable of, that's different than actually stepping into action. And so in order to fully emerge, there's a couple things we need to do to get ourselves off the couch, because it's very easy once you've worked through the cycle to get a little tired and just need to sit on the couch for a while before you can truly, spring into action and take those next steps.
And sometimes that's good, right? Sometimes we
Yeah.
need the rest,
Need the rest.
and right, because you don't want to so often we take action out of fear
Mhm.
and not action out of a real place of like, I have learned the lessons I need to learn. They are now rooted and reincorporated into who I am. And now I'm ready to take action from this place, as opposed to, oh my gosh, let me just try and fix it, which I just see
No.
even in the entrepreneurial space, which is where, I spend all my time. It's all meant, so many of the actions are based on fear, and I'm supposed to do this, and this is what everyone else is doing, and comparison, and I'm not good enough, and oh my God, I'm not going to make any money unless I do this, as
Mhm.
opposed to coming from a place of real center of here's who I am. Here's the additional layers, right? It's maybe like, of the onion that are being added on, right?
Yeah.
To make me even more interesting, to make me even more able to serve. And how do I approach it from that perspective?
Yeah. And I would also add to that, where are your expectations coming from? Because so many of our expectations don't come from ourselves. They come from parents, they come from bosses, they come from investors, they come from co-founders. And are you rushing to fix something to meet someone else's expectation? Or are you keeping your North Star in mind? Have you even identified your North Star, your goal, your long-term goal that you're working towards? Right? Like understanding your expectations is critical to working through that process. And I do have, a piece in the book about how to audit your expectations, manage them, and set new ones.
Yeah. So walk us through the format of the book, because it sounds really interesting in that it sounds like some academic, and this not academic maybe, but here's the synthesis of what this step looks like. But it sounds like it's like an actual workbook.
It's not an actual
Okay.
workbook. I mean, there are exercises
But there are
throughout if you want to
exercises.
pause
Gotcha.
and do them. But the book, I mean, most of the book is storytelling. Like I said, I make
Mm.
sense of the world through storytelling. And the book is really comprised of, it's about a dozen stories of founders and leaders and entrepreneurs and people who are doing really amazing work to, again, shift perceptions and change the world for the better. And it tells the stories of the setbacks that they went through, and it shows how they cycled through the setback cycle. What it does then in between their stories, it pauses to give you an understanding, because I mean, that's how I came to develop the framework. I saw it through people's stories, and then I went to experts to understand it. And so it's really, I mean, it reads like a book about the characters that you love. And each chapter has 1 to 2 stories about entrepreneurs in it. And I go deep into their stories. Because like you said, you got to get into the baggage, you got to get into the messy middle in order to understand what their true story was. We're not just like glorifying success. We're also not glorifying pain. We're not glorifying the potentially bad thing that happened to them that led to their setback. We're showing those bookends. But where the book really goes into is the story of their messy middle and how they work through the process to get to the other side, to work through the cycle. And then their story is supported by the research and the expert interviews and the people who have the knowledge about how our brains work and why setbacks lead to success.
That's fascinating. I cannot wait to read it. When can we read it?
So the book comes out in March, but it is available for pre-order now. So if you go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, you can pre-order the Setback Cycle so that it arrives on your doorstep or on your Kindle on March 19th.
Oh, I'm so excited. And maybe we should collaborate on some sort of a book club or something, because I think
Love
it's
that.
so aligned with the vision of this podcast, is this idea of, yeah, let's talk about, I love that messy middle. Let's talk about that, messy middle. Let's just be really open about it, because I think people have so much shame about the setbacks that have happened, or they try to push them under the rug, but they're the things that inform who we are, right? Even though we already have that North Star, sometimes the North Star doesn't even become clear until we've gone through some of those, especially those larger setbacks. I know for me, it didn't, right? It didn't become clear until I had a massive setback and realized I've been living my whole life outside of my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I can go through that process of finding out what that North Star is and going through that process. But really understanding what we've gone through, even if you're not in it, right? Feels like you could use your book as a tool of even reflection afterwards of saying, yeah, gosh, this was something that I went through, and here's how it informed me, and let me work through some of these exercises in a way that lets me get the nugget out of it.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. And I think people, some people are going to come to the book because, oh, I've heard of this person. I've heard of, Norma Kamali or Stacey London or one of the more well-known people that are in the book. And they're going to come for that story, and they're going to read someone else who's a little lesser known, and they're going to be so inspired by all of it. And then they're going to, a lot of people I think are going to read these stories and see themselves on the pages and start to understand their own life experiences through the experiences of others. And yeah, I mean, look, I agree. We don't tend to really get into the messy middle. But just before this interview, I got a call that I was so excited about this one consulting client I was going to work with. And I was like sort of structuring my life around making room for this big project that was going to be like so lucrative, so exciting. I was like, I thought I had it. Got a call 10 minutes before I got on this podcast, didn't get it. And I'm like, I'm embarrassed, but I'm also like, okay, that's a setback. Like, that's a setback. So now I need to, recalibrate some of my revenue projections for my own business this year. And that's okay. I know how to work through this. And I know that I'm processing, the loss of that. That's not fun. But I had that moment happen, and I was like, I'm going to talk about this publicly because I think we need to talk about our setbacks and our losses and our, the things that happen in what I hope is a messy middle moment. And because now I've cleared all this space in my calendar to accommodate that client, what else is going to fill that space? Something amazing, I hope. But I'm also not fast forwarding through the cycle. I'm embracing this moment, dealing with it, and then I'll move on to explore. So you can cycle through the setback cycle 5 times in one day for like small setbacks, or you can go through like a big one that you're cycling through for like years and years. So there's a big spectrum when it comes to setbacks. They are not all the same.
And I love that you get to use your own model in your own life on an ongoing basis. Do you actually like think that way? You're like, okay, I'm currently in the explore phase.
I do, but also you would think I would be so good at going through setbacks because I wrote the book. But when, there's logic, and then when it's it's all emotion. And sometimes, I think I said to my therapist recently, like, oh, I feel like yucky about this. I just want to fast forward to feeling better. Like, why can't I just feel better? And she was like, well, you kind of have to like process why you feel pain. And I was like, oh yeah, that's the embrace phase. I'm just like doing the thing that I advise people not to do. And I'm not working through my own cycle. So, okay. So easier said than done. I have the book. You can have the framework for it. It does not mean you're always going to nail it, because I, the author, the person who created this framework, I do not always nail it. I am human. And I, sometimes don't listen to my own advice, and I don't recognize when I'm in a setback because like I said, it's not always obvious.
And I love that because it's so authentic, right? I mean, and we're all like that, right? We're all just trying to do the best we can. Even when we're the experts at it, you have become the expert at how to get through setbacks.
Yeah.
And yet you still struggle with getting through setbacks. You luckily you're informed through this, but that messy middle is called messy for a reason, because there's so many emotions. And just because intellectually you understand the process, and while that's incredibly important, there's still all the emotions that you need to go through. And there's still the grieving that you need to go through. I was in another interview just before this, and we were talking about that. Really giving yourself time to grieve the loss of what you thought you wanted, or what you had that you lost, that you thought you had to have in your life, and taking a little bit of time and really allowing yourself to feel it. Now you can't stay in there, but you have to. The only way out is through.
Yeah, exactly. And there's fight, flight, and there's also freeze. Sometimes you need a freeze. That's okay. Don't let the freeze lead to rumination, but a freeze is okay. Let yourself have that. You need it. You need to recalibrate.
And in somatics, right, it's good to freeze, but then, you want to figure out what's the way I'm going to then shake this off, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
finding a way to get it out of you, right? So that it
Yep.
doesn't stick in your body. Because what we try to go so quickly to, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then I read a book, and I can't remember the gentleman who literally wrote the book on somatics. He talked in there about how we try to comfort people who are really upset. They've gone through something very traumatic, gone through a breakup, right? Their boyfriend just
Mhm.
broke up with them, and your best friend's there and she's sobbing, and you're saying, here, it's okay. It's okay. Shh. It's okay. We're really, like, physiologically, the
It's not okay.
best thing for you to do is to just let her cry.
Yep.
Let it come out. And we're
Mhm.
so uncomfortable with emotions and big emotions in our society that we don't allow ourselves time to, you know,
Yeah.
kick the wall, or, beat up on the pillows, or, cry, or whatever. We want to get so fast because it's not comfortable. It's messy. It's why I call the messy middle, right?
Yeah.
But allowing ourselves to really feel it and to move through it. Otherwise it comes back and haunts us.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways to move through it if you are someone who, like many of us, has been sort of conditioned on the concept of positive psychology and wants to, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, everything away. This is me. I have absolutely fallen prey to this. And there are ways, again, like if you just take a thoughtful approach, we go back to what we were talking about a little while ago, how if you just answer questions thoughtfully, you don't rush to fix problems without all the information, you take a step back and you sort of remember the larger mission. It's the same thing with working through that embrace phase. Why is this so painful? Where have I experienced this before? Am I sort of, am I triggered by things like my intelligence being insulted? And am I feeling like my intelligence has been insulted in this moment? Making those connections gives you a lot of information and a lot of, I guess, ideas on how you can move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited to read the book. We will
Thank you.
go pre-order it. I will put a link inside the show notes. And maybe by the time you're listening to this, the book's already out. It's already a bestseller. Amy is, on all of the places. Where are the places? So let's dream for a minute. Where are the places that you would want to be? Well, I guess what, 6-ish? No, let's say a year from now, talking about how to get through setbacks. What are your dream places? We're going to manifest them right now.
I mean, I'm sure every author will say this, but I'll say it too. The New York Times bestseller list would be great. That would be great. Speaking to corporations, speaking to employees, helping teams understand how they can work through setbacks. You know this because you took one of my workshops, but I've been doing some of these workshops for groups of entrepreneurs, but also for teams and corporations on how their teams can work through tumultuous times and all that good stuff. But yeah, look, I would be thrilled if in 6 months to a year from now, I'm doing exactly what I'm doing, but on the New York Times bestseller list and to, bigger audiences and, more people who can be impacted by understanding the setbacks that they're going through and having the tools to work through them. I think that's the dream of every author and every writer, right? Like to touch as many lives as possible. And I don't have to be front and center in this. Like the stories of the people I interviewed and wrote about in this book, they're front and center. But I'm happy to offer the tools that I learned from them to as many people as possible, because I really think that the understanding of this concept will really go a long way to change people's lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again. And I can't wait to read the book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. This was a great conversation.
Mwah.
Thank you for listening to Bosses with Baggage. We are honored that you chose to spend your precious time with us. I hope that you are feeling inspired to reframe your setbacks into your superpowers so that you can change not only your life, but the life of everyone around you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, and I sure hope you did, please subscribe, rate, and share on your favorite podcast listener. And if you have any ideas for a future guest, or you need some help growing your business, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me directly on my website, which is sherrysutton.com, SherrySutton.com. We'll see you next time.